One step into Beverly Hills, and the air itself seems perfumed with wealth. The palm-lined streets shimmer under the Californian sun, every mansion a monument to the pursuit of luxury. In this enclave of fortune, history lingers quietly behind iron gates and ivy walls. Among these guardians of grandeur stands one name that shaped it all, Doheny. A family whose fortune rose from the earth itself, whose ambition transformed rough Californian hills into the most coveted land in America. Edward L. Doheny's ascent from modest beginnings to oil magnate rewrote the map of Los Angeles. His success poured through the veins of the city, giving life to Beverly Hills as a sanctuary of privilege and polish. Today we explore how the Doheny legacy built a dynasty that defined Southern California's idea of elegance, a story of vision, extravagance, and the family who turned oil into empire. Edward L. Doheny turned California's hills into rivers of gold. The 1920s roared loudest for his Doheny family. Edward Doheny, an Irish-American prospector with a miner's instinct and a financier's nerve, struck oil in Los Angeles in 1892. By the Jazz Age, he was one of the wealthiest men alive, his fortune standing beside the likes of Rockefeller and Carnegie. By 1925, his net worth had surpassed $100 million, roughly $1.5 billion today. And Doheny's ascent began far from privilege. Alongside his partner, Charles A. Canfield, he scoured dusty lots near downtown Los Angeles before expanding into the oil fields of Mexico. Their company, Huasteca Petroleum, soon dominated the industry, controlling nearly 500,000 acres and producing 85% of Mexico's oil by 1902. Within a decade, Doheny had become the most powerful independent oil man in the world. He built more than wealth, he built Los Angeles itself, and his fortune gave rise to an empire of architecture and legacy. In 1928, he commissioned a Tudor revival estate in Beverly Hills, the Greystone Mansion. Built at a cost of $3.1 million, or more than $50 million today, it was a wedding gift to his son, Edward Ned Doheny Jr. Designed by Gordon B. Kaufman, Greystone stood as the grandest private home in California, 55 rooms, 46,000 feet, and 16 acres of manicured perfection. And Greystone became the visible crown of the Doheny world. Beyond it, the family's French Gothic residence at Chester Place marked the center of Los Angeles high society. Indeed, the Dohenys were no longer prospectors. They were the establishment. Their reach extended into every corner of South California life. They gave land for colleges and churches, donated coastal acreage that became Doheny State Beach, and financed hospitals and libraries that shaped the cultural fabric of Los Angeles. Philanthropy was their new industry, refinement their public creed. And the Doheny name came to define West Coast elegance. Their garages housed bespoke automobiles built by Earl Automobile Works, each car a statement of artistry and precision. Inside their homes, paintings, sculpture, and rare books filled galleries that blurred the line between mansion and museum. By the end of the decade, Doheny wealth had become inseparable from Los Angeles itself. The city's roads, universities, and landmarks bore the imprint of a man who began with nothing and left behind a world that glittered. But every fortune, once it reaches high enough, meets its reckoning, and the Doheny story would soon darken. Edward L. Doheny's rise was the kind of story America once promised to anyone bold enough to chase it. Born in 1856 in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, to Irish immigrants fleeing famine and political unrest, his life began in a world far removed from privilege. And the Dohenys, like thousands of Irish families from that era, carried little more than resilience and hope, traits that would come to define the patriarch's legend later on. From an early age, Edward showed a stubborn independence. By 16, he was working as a mule driver for the U.S. Geological Survey, hauling supplies through the rugged terrain of the American frontier. The job paid little, but it introduced him to the mineral wealth hidden behind the soil and to the men who made fortunes uncovering it. His search for opportunity took him west. Through the mining camps of South Dakota, New Mexico, and Arizona, he joined the restless wave of fortune seekers chasing the promise of silver and gold. The work was dangerous, the results uncertain, and the profits fleeting. The 1880 census even listed him simply as a painter, a telling snapshot of a man struggling to hold on to his dream. The American dream for Doheny began not with success, but with refusal. A refusal to accept obscurity. In the 1890s, he arrived in Los Angeles, a modest, sun-baked town still years from its cinematic destiny. But as he explored the arid hills north of downtown, he noticed something peculiar: black tar bubbling from the ground. To most, it was a nuisance. To Doheny, it was a signal. That discovery in 1892 would change California forever. He partnered with fellow prospector Charles A. Canfield, and together they drilled the first successful oil well in Los Angeles, near what is now Echo Park. In a city of dreamers, Doheny was the first to strike something real. The well was primitive, a wooden derrick and a hand-dug shaft, but what gushed forth transformed the entire region. Oil turned Doheny from a struggling prospector into an industrial pioneer, and Los Angeles into the new capital of American energy. Within a few short years, the Doheny wells ignited an economic revolution. Oil fever spread across California, drawing investors, engineers, and fortune seekers. Los Angeles grew upward and outward, its streets paved with the profits of a man who had once wandered the desert in search of gold dust. By the dawn of the 20th century, Doheny had built an empire that stretched far beyond the hills of Los Angeles. But for all of his vision, this is still a man who remembered the lean years, a self-made magnate who never entirely trusted the comfort of wealth. His story was proof that the American dream could be won by will alone, but keeping it would require something far rarer. By the early 20th century, Edward L. Doheny had become one of the most formidable figures in American industry. His ventures stretched far beyond California, reaching across oceans and into the political heart of Washington itself. Yet the same audacity that built his empire would soon invite its undoing. In 1901, Doheny expanded into Tampico, Mexico, establishing the nation's first commercial oil well. His company, the Mexican Petroleum Company, quickly became a continental force, fueling ships, factories, and armies. Within 15 years, his wells were among the most productive on Earth, one of them yielding an astonishing 260,000 barrels a day. Doheny had turned Mexico's oil fields into a kingdom, one that made him indispensable to both governments and financiers. But empire has a way of breeding enemies, and in the politics of oil, loyalty was a currency that expired quickly. By the 1920s, Doheny's business dealings placed him squarely in the crosshairs of the Teapot Dome scandal, a political firestorm that would engulf the Harding administration and stain his legacy forever. The controversy began when Albert B. Fall, the U.S. Secretary of the Interior, leased naval oil reserves in Wyoming and California to private companies without competitive bidding. Among those companies was Doheny's own Pan American Petroleum and Transport Company, which secured access to the Elk Hills Reserve in 1922. When investigators uncovered a secret payment of $100,000 from Doheny to Secretary Fall, described by Doheny as a loan, public outrage followed. To many, it looked less like business and more like bribery. Newspapers ran with the story, and Washington reeled as headlines tied one of the nation's richest men to corruption at the highest levels of government. Doheny was indicted, tried, and ultimately acquitted in 1930, but the damage was irreversible. Fall went to prison, the first former cabinet member ever convicted of a felony in U.S. history, and Doheny's reputation never fully recovered. The oil that had built his fortune now slicked his name with scandal and tragedy would soon deepen the shadow. In 1929, Doheny's only son, Edward Ned Doheny, and his close friend and aide, Hugh Plunkett, were found dead inside Greystone Mansion. The official story claimed Plunkett shot Ned before turning the gun on himself, distraught over the Teapot Dome investigation. The press feasted on the mystery, and whispers of conspiracy and cover-up haunted the family for years. The scandal and the deaths hollowed Doheny's spirit. Once the Titan of California, he withdrew from public life, retreating into the privacy of his vast estates. His later years were marked by illness, litigation, and a grief that no wealth could ease. When the public turned its gaze elsewhere, the empire he built still remained, grand, enduring, and forever touched by tragedy. The shadow of the Teapot Dome scandal lingered long after the headlines faded, and Edward L. Doheny retreated from public life, his once commanding presence now defined by loss rather than triumph. But within the walls of his family's empire, another chapter was beginning, one of restoration and quiet endurance. In 1883, long before the scandals in oil wells, Doheny had married Carrie Luella Wilkins. Their years together were marked by hardship and transience, moving from one mining town to another as Edward searched for fortune. Her death in 1899 left him a widower with a young daughter, Eileen, and a grief that would shape the rest of his life. The following year, Doheny married Carrie Estelle Bezold, a young telephone operator he met in Los Angeles. It was a union that would transform both their destinies. Estelle rose from modest beginnings to become one of California's most influential philanthropists, a woman whose refinement and devotion steadied the family through its most turbulent years. Her leadership and grace provided a moral ballast to a family tested by public scrutiny. If Edward was the builder of the Doheny Empire, Estelle became its conscience. Her contributions to education, healthcare, and the arts became the enduring face of the family legacy. She helped found the Doheny Eye Institute, inspired by her own battle with partial blindness, and her charitable work extended deep into the cultural fabric of Los Angeles. Through her generosity, the Dohenys helped establish schools, churches, and hospitals that still bear their name today. The couple's descendants carried that tradition into the modern era. Their granddaughter, Lucy Doheny Batson, and her children after her maintained the family's quiet influence through philanthropy and cultural patronage. Among them is Larry Niven, Lucy's grandson, a celebrated science fiction author whose imagination continues the family's creative legacy in another form entirely. The story of the Dohenys, once defined by oil and scandal, became a lesson in refinement, discretion, and renewal. Even now, their presence runs through the veins of Los Angeles. Doheny Drive winds through Beverly Hills as a permanent reminder of the family's reach. The Carrie Estelle Doheny Foundation, endowed with hundreds of millions, continues to fund medical research, education, and the arts. Their contributions shaped not just the skyline, but the soul of the city. And of course, there is Greystone Mansion, the grand, tragic centerpiece of their history. After decades as a private residence, the estate was sold to the city of Beverly Hills in 1965 and transformed into a public park. 6 years later, it opened its gates to visitors, its gardens and stone halls now preserved for all to see. Greystone became both monument and memorial, a testament to wealth's fleeting power and legacy's enduring grace. The Doheny dynasty began in the dust of the frontier, rose to unimaginable heights, and endured the crucible of scandal. What remains today is the refined echo of a family that helped shape Los Angeles. A lineage that understood, perhaps too late, that fortune is fragile, but legacy, when tended to, lasts forever. And now I'd love to see in the comments, are you from Southern California, SoCal? And if so, were you aware of the entire scope of this family's ups and downs, scandal, and renewal, as we said? I look forward to hearing from you below, and thanks for joining us for another episode of Old Money Empires. We'll see you on the next one.